Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again in this YouTube astrological segment. I'm going to be talking about astrology and the Typhoon Vamco and or Ulysses, depending on who's calling it. What people in the Philippines are referring to it as Typhoon Ulysses. It's Vamco. Seems like that's more universal as far as the name for it. But what I want to first state is that I offer my prayers and condolences to the families and close friends of anybody that has perished due to this calamity or what have you, this disaster. And I think there's like 42 people that have been confirmed dead so far. I believe that's in the Philippines. Now I'm going to talk about and also, I want to offer my prayers to the people that have been affected by this. And my understanding is there's like around 144,000 people in the Philippines that have been affected by this, and this has caused a lot of problems for those people. You have power outages. You talk about. They were really ravaged by this disaster, by this typhoon. You have homes that are at least submerged to some degree, and the water level is hitting a lot of these homes at the first floor, a first story, if not close to the second story of their homes. The water level is very, very high right now due to this flooding. And I'm going to talk about some transits and natal placements. What I'm looking at is the chart for Manila, Philippines. It is from astrotheme.com. I couldn't find it on astro.com. What came up was the one for astrotheme, so I'm going to go with that one. I want to see how this may have affected at least Manila, and some transits and natal placements that might have been tied into this. Now, when I look at the chart for Manila, you know, there's a number of things here that are, as far as transits and natal placements, tied into floodings. You have the one thing they have is that there's a tight in their chart. There's a tight conjunction from Jupiter in Pisces to Pluto in Pisces, and you're talking about Pluto is about death, and Pisces rules the sea. It's water, which wouldn't exclude typhoons, and you have Jupiter making a conjunction to it. Now, Jupiter, as I've talked about in previous videos, could be very paradoxical, could be very strongly benign and benevolent, but it could also have a tendency to enlarge and expand. Now, like in the case of Manila, that can enlarge and expand deaths due to typhoons, due to floodings. And Pluto, of course, is very destructive energy. It falls in their sixth house of the daily routine. They do experience floodings and these kind of conditions more often than a lot of other cities and countries do. In the natal chart, also Chiron is in Pisces as well. Chiron can be about emotional suffering, physical suffering. This, being in Pisces, of course, that could be attributed to flooding. And also the pandemic, the COVID-19, Pisces can also be, of course, about diseases that can't be eradicated and cured. Chiron is in Pisces. Again, Pluto, they have Pluto in Pisces, so it's not, they're obviously experience a number of deaths due to the COVID-19. The COVID-19 is something as of right now that can't be eradicated and cured. And again, Manila does have Jupiter making a close conjunction to their Pluto, which could exacerbate this energy. Another thing too, in their natal chart, they have Uranus. Uranus is in the third house, but not far from the fourth house cusp, so it's not surprising there is susceptibility to disasters that affect one's home life and emotional security. Being in Capricorn, of course, this could be very depressive energy, causing certain despondency. And the thing too is they also at this time transit Neptune is in Pisces, not far from the natal Jupiter of Manila, and that of course can exacerbate conditions with flooding. When you're talking about Neptune is associated with flooding, especially being in Pisces, you have a by transit it's a loose conjunction to the natal Jupiter, and that can exacerbate things associated with Neptune, followed by Pluto, which of course Pluto is associated with death. Now, another thing is that transit Uranus is not far from the 8th house cusp of Manila, Philippines, and that could be an indicator of death, which comes from some kind of disaster. Um, some other things too I'm looking is that at this point in time, I know the sun may have been in a different degree when all these flooding began, but as of right now, the transit sun in Scorpio at 22 degrees at the time of this video, or at least close to the time of this video. It might have actually may have gone into the 23 degrees in the Scorpio, but it was at during the period of this flooding and dealing with it. It was at least at one point the sun was at 22 degrees Scorpio. 22 degrees in fixed signs, including Scorpio, of course, is a critical degree. Scorpio is a sign of destruction and death. Uh, another thing another thing I'm noticing too, as far as transits go, there's a number of there's three planets that are transiting the 4th house of home and end of life for Manila, Philippines, including Pluto. And Pluto can be very turbulent energy. It also can be very destructive, and it's transiting their 4th house of the home and the end of life and emotional security at this time. Another thing that I noticed too at this time is that I'm looking at the chart, and I mean, it can be somewhat controversial. Some people may not see it as a T-square configuration, but there is what I would consider a cardinal T-square configuration, which consists of the Sun in Cancer making the opposition to Uranus in Capricorn, and both those points being squared by the Libra ascendant. At this time, transit Mars is in a loose conjunction, a loose opposition to the Libra ascendant. When you have, and Mars, of course, is very volatile energy, especially being in a sign like Aries, which is very aggressive and combative and can be very volatile. This, when you have a transit making an opposition to a focal point in a T-square configuration, often significant events can transpire and occur. At this time, you're talking about Mars being involved in the transit. Mars, of course, and being in Aries, especially very volatile, turbulent energy. Uranus is involved in the T-square configuration. Uranus in depressive Capricorn, not far from the 4th house cusp of the home, Uranus being associated with disaster. You have the ascendant, which is like basically the face, you could say maybe the physical structure of a place. And it was something that they really, I mean, being in Libra, something that they saw, being, the bodies, the buildings and homes, being something that they may have seen as very pristine, very attractive, very peaceful energy. And then you have the sun being involved too in the T-square configuration, and that is about life, vitality, energy. And again, the T-square configuration I'm talking about is a cardinal T-square configuration in the chart of Manila, Philippines, which consists of the opposition of the Sun in Cancer to Uranus in Capricorn, both being squared by the Libra ascendant. the focal point of the configuration, and that focal point is being opposed a very rather loose opposition from the transit Mars in Aries, and also the transit Chiron. Well, transit Chiron is in Aries as well, and of course that could indicate just suffering and lack of feeling worthy, and it could be issues that can, I mean, obviously when you're talking about, Aries, I'm wondering if people have suffered any injuries. It's in their sixth house of health. Maybe perhaps some people have suffered some injuries too. The head or face area at this time. So those are, I mean, really don't have too much more to say about this at this point in time. Again, it's just a really, very devastating, very sad situation that this area, just in general, not just the Philippines, but Vietnam, I believe they're having this. This is coming toward them, and this is just something where, it's terrible that the Philippines has had to deal with being ravaged by the COVID-19, aka the coronavirus, and to add insult to abject misery, they are now having to combat this very fierce typhoon that has occurred. And again, my prayers do go out to the Philippines, and also want to say that the transit Neptune at this time is making at least a loose square. It looks like it's actually making a square to the natal Mars in Gemini in the Philippines chart, and this could give some weakness that sadly the people in the Philippines probably are feeling a little bit lackluster now, and it's a certain lack of energy, and they feel more like resting at this time, sadly, as opposed to taking action due to what has taken place. This can give, I mean, Mars and Gemini can be about a lot of action, a lot of physical energy with mobility. But when you have the transit Neptune making an adverse aspect to the natal Mars, there's going to be more feeling like just being more subdued, more lethargic, than as opposed to actually doing something. And you're talking about the planet Neptune, which is associated with flooding, which of course can be conflicting with actual energy and movement that involves, I mean, Mars being Gemini, mobility, and it does make sense because a lot of these people are everything but immobilized. They are having to rely on helicopters to rescue them at this time. Even evacuation places are flooded, and it's really causing a lot of conflict with them having to take any kind of really, the action that needs to be taken at this time. And also in the going back to in the natal chart of the Manila, Philippines, Mars actually conjoins Neptune, so that's another indicator of some kind of harm through flooding, and it can affect the mobility, especially given that this is in Gemini. So anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying stay out.